December 8, 1941. The day after Pearl Harbor, thousands of young American men flooded into recruitment centers across the nation, fired by patriotism and rage. They came ready to fight, farm boys from Iowa, factory workers from Detroit, college students from Boston. They came expecting to be handed rifles and shipped overseas. What they got instead was something far more mundane, far more humiliating, and ultimately far more transformative for American society. They got rejected by the thousands, not for cowardice, not for poor eyesight or flat feet, but for their teeth. At Camp Upton in New York, dental officers worked around the clock examining the mouths of eager recruits. What they found shocked them. Young men, barely 20 years old, with mouths full of decay, missing molars, infected gums, abscesses that had gone untreated for years. The examining officer would shine his light, peer into the open mouth and shake his head. Rejected, unfit for service. In one examination room after another, the same scene played out. The patriotic fervor drained from a young man's face as he realized his country didn't want him. Not because he couldn't shoot straight or march in formation, but because his teeth were rotting out of his head. The statistics that emerged from those first months of conscription painted a devastating picture of American health. When the Selective Service began examining potential draftees in the autumn of 1940, more than a year before Pearl Harbor, military dentists discovered that dental defects were the single most common reason for rejection. In some regions, particularly in rural areas and impoverished urban neighborhoods, the rejection rate for dental problems exceeded 30%. But the problem went deeper than rejection rates. Even among those accepted for service, the dental situation was dire. The average American soldier in 1941 was missing 5 permanent teeth. 5. And those teeth they did have? They were often riddled with cavities, crowned by decay, held in place by infected gums. Dental officers examining incoming recruits reported that it was rare, genuinely rare, to find a young man with a full set of healthy teeth. The Army faced a crisis. Wars are won by healthy men, and a soldier who can't eat properly can't fight properly. A man with a throbbing abscess can't concentrate on his rifle sights. An infection in the jaw can spread, causing fever, weakness, potentially death. The military needed healthy teeth, and America's young men simply didn't have them. But this dental crisis didn't emerge from nowhere. It was rooted in a culture that viewed toothbrushing as optional at best, and at worst as a peculiar affectation of the wealthy. In 1940, only 7% of Americans brushed their teeth with any regularity. 7%. To put that in perspective, 93 out of every 100 Americans went to bed each night without brushing their teeth. They woke up each morning without brushing their teeth. They ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and never once ran a brush across their enamel. This wasn't ignorance exactly. Americans knew teeth existed. They knew teeth could hurt. What they lacked was the cultural habit, the daily ritual, the understanding that oral hygiene was something you did preventatively rather than reactively. You went to the dentist when a tooth hurt, not before. And dentists? They were expensive. In rural areas, they might be hours away. In poor neighborhoods, a visit to the dentist could cost a week's wages. So people endured. They lived with pain. They lost teeth in their 20s and 30s and thought nothing of it. Dentures weren't a sign of old age. They were common among people in their 40s, even their 30s. The reasons for this widespread neglect were complex and interconnected. First, there was simple economics. During the Great Depression, which had ended barely a year before Pearl Harbor, millions of families had struggled to put food on the table. Toothpaste and toothbrushes weren't priorities. They were luxuries. A bar of soap could be cut into pieces and used for multiple purposes. A rag could clean a face, a body, a floor. But toothpaste? It had one use, and that use seemed far less urgent than eating or staying warm. Second, there was infrastructure. In rural America, where millions still lived, indoor plumbing was far from universal. Running water in the home was a modern convenience, not a given right. If you had to pump water from a well and haul it inside, you used it sparingly. Washing your face and hands made sense. Filling a cup to rinse your mouth after brushing seemed wasteful. And in areas without fluoridated water, which was nearly everywhere, The protective benefits of modern water treatment didn't exist. Third, and perhaps most importantly, there was culture. Dental hygiene simply wasn't part of the daily American routine. Fathers didn't teach it to sons. Mothers didn't insist on it with daughters. It wasn't taught in schools with any regularity. There were no public health campaigns urging Americans to brush. The American Dental Association existed, but its reach was limited, its message confined to those who already had access to dental care. The habit of brushing twice daily, of flossing, of regular dental checkups, these were behaviors of the educated upper middle class, not of working Americans. So the young men who flooded into recruitment centers in late 1941 and early 1942 brought with them the dental habits, or lack thereof, of their entire generation. They were the products of their upbringing, their economic circumstances, their culture. And the army had to figure out what to do with them. The initial military response was simply to reject those with the worst dental problems and accept the rest, planning to deal with dental issues as they arose. But this approach quickly proved untenable. As America mobilized for total war, as factories retooled to produce tanks instead of cars, as millions of men prepared to ship overseas, the sheer scale of the dental crisis became impossible to ignore. In early 1942, Surgeon General James C. McGee received reports from training camps across the country. At Fort Benning in Georgia, dental sick call was overwhelmed. At Camp Pendleton in California, Marines were missing training exercises because of tooth pain. At bases in Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, the situation was similar. Dental officers were working 16-hour days and still couldn't keep up. Extraction was often the only option. Pull the tooth, give the man some aspirin, send him back to training. But extraction required time, equipment, and trained dentists, all of which were in short supply. The Army did the math. If the average soldier needed significant dental work, fillings, extractions, perhaps bridges or partial dentures, and if treating each soldier took several hours spread across multiple appointments, then the man-hours required to address the dental health of millions of servicemen would be staggering. Millions of hours of lost training. Thousands of dentists pulled away from civilian practice. Mountains of supplies, amalgam, gold, anesthetics, surgical instruments. But there was another option. Instead of treating dental disease, they could try to prevent it. This was a radical concept. In 1942, preventative dental care was not standard practice, even in civilian life. Dentists were taught to treat problems, not prevent them. The idea that you could avoid cavities through daily hygiene, through brushing and proper diet, was understood by dental researchers but hadn't penetrated into mainstream medical practice or public consciousness. But the military had certain advantages. It had captive populations, young men living in barracks, eating in mess halls, following strict routines. It had authority. Generals could order men to brush their teeth in a way that civilian health officials could never order American families to do so. And it had motivation. Healthy soldiers were more effective soldiers, and effectiveness in war meant victory or defeat, life or death. So in early 1942, the U.S. Army launched what would become one of the most successful public health campaigns in American history, though few recognized it as such at the time. The goal was simple. Teach every American soldier to brush his teeth twice a day. Make it a habit. Make it mandatory. Make it part of military discipline, as automatic as making your bunk or polishing your boots. The implementation began with supplies. Every soldier, upon induction, was issued a toiletry kit. Inside that kit, alongside soap, a razor, and a comb, were two items many had never owned before. A toothbrush and a tube of toothpaste. Not fancy items. Standard military issue, designed for function rather than comfort. The toothbrush had a straight wooden or plastic handle and nylon bristles. The toothpaste was simple, often unflavored or mintily harsh. But they were there and they were free and every soldier got them. Next came the training. Dental hygiene became part of basic training, taught alongside how to disassemble a rifle and how to dig a foxhole. Drill sergeants, those legendary figures of military discipline, added tooth-brushing to their list of enforced behaviors. In the morning, after reveille, there would be time set aside for personal hygiene. Recruits would line up at the latrines, toothbrushes in hand. They would brush together under supervision, as they did everything else in the military. At first, many of the recruits found this absurd. They were training to fight the Nazis and the Japanese Empire. They were learning to kill, to survive, to endure hardships that would break lesser men. And their sergeants were making them brush their teeth like children? But in the military, you followed orders. If the sergeant said brush, you brushed. If he said brush twice a day, you brushed twice a day. Resistance was futile. Compliance was mandatory. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, something remarkable happened. The habit formed. Private First Class Robert Henderson, a farm boy from rural Kansas, had never owned a toothbrush before the Army gave him one. In his family, teeth were things you lost eventually, like baby teeth but permanent. His father had lost most of his teeth by age 35. His grandfather had been toothless by 40. Henderson assumed the same fate awaited him. But in the Army, he brushed. Every morning, every evening. He brushed because his sergeant told him to brush. He brushed because everyone else was brushing. He brushed because if he didn't, there would be consequences, extra KP duty, additional drills, public humiliation. After 6 weeks of basic training, Henderson noticed something. His mouth felt different, cleaner. His breath didn't have that sour taste in the morning. His gums, which had always bled a little when he ate hard foods, stopped bleeding. It was a small thing barely worth mentioning. But it was noticeable. Multiply that experience by millions. Millions of young men, from every corner of America, every socioeconomic background, every educational level, all being taught the same simple habit. Brush your teeth. Use toothpaste. Do it twice a day. Don't skip. Don't make excuses. Just do it. The military didn't stop at teaching. It also provided ongoing dental care, something most of these men had never experienced. At every major base, dental clinics were established. Dental officers examined soldiers regularly, checking for cavities, gum disease, problems that could worsen under the stress of combat. When issues were found, they were treated. Cavities were filled. Infected teeth were extracted under proper anesthesia, not in some dentist's office where you gripped the armrests and prayed for it to be over quickly. Soldiers received care that would have been financially impossible for many of them in civilian life. The impact was measurable. By 1943, dental sick call numbers began to decline. Fewer soldiers were missing training for tooth pain. Fewer emergency extractions were needed. The preventative approach was working. But more than that, the military was creating a generation of Americans who had internalized a new habit. Toothbrushing was becoming automatic. This transformation extended beyond the Army. The Navy adopted similar programs. So did the Marines, Coast Guard, Army Air Corps. Every branch of the military recognized the importance of dental health and implemented programs to promote it. On ships, in submarines, at air bases across the Pacific, American servicemen were brushing their teeth. It became a shared experience, a common touchstone. In letters home, soldiers mentioned it casually, almost humorously. Their mothers sent care packages with toothpaste, a luxury item that had become a necessity. The dental supply industry noticed. Companies like Procter & Gamble, which had been manufacturing soap and other household products, saw an opportunity. The military needed toothpaste by the ton. Contracts were signed. Production ramped up. Factories that had been making soap now added toothpaste production lines. The simple tube of toothpaste, which had been a relatively niche product before the war, became standard military supply. But the transformation didn't stay confined to military bases. As soldiers went on leave, as they returned home on furlough, they brought their habits with them. They brushed their teeth in their childhood bathrooms. Their younger siblings saw them doing it. Their parents noticed. Their girlfriends and wives observed this new routine. And slowly the habit began to spread. Military chaplains, writing reports on troop morale, noted the change in attitudes toward personal hygiene. Soldiers took pride in their appearance, in their health, in their discipline. They wrote home about the importance of taking care of yourself, of maintaining standards. This messaging, coming from trusted family members who were off fighting for their country, carried weight that no public health campaign could match. Women, too, played a crucial role in spreading the habit. As millions of women joined the workforce, Taking jobs in factories and offices to support the war effort, they encountered military dental hygiene standards in unexpected places. Defense plants, concerned about worker health and productivity, began implementing some of the military's health programs. Posters in factory break rooms encouraged toothbrushing. Some employers provided free toothbrushes and toothpaste, seeing it as a minor expense that could reduce sick days and improve worker health. The American Dental Association, recognizing an unprecedented opportunity, launched its own public education campaigns. Working with military officials, they produced pamphlets, posters, and radio advertisements promoting dental hygiene. The message was simple. Our boys overseas are fighting for freedom, and they're taking care of their teeth. You can support the war effort by doing the same. It was patriotic to brush your teeth. It was your duty. Schools began incorporating dental hygiene into their curricula. Teachers, many of whom had sons or brothers in the military, understood the importance of instilling good habits early. Children learned to brush in school. They brought toothbrushes from home, or schools provided them. They recited rhymes about brushing. Up and down and round, that's the way we scrub the town. Silly verses that made the habit memorable. These children, too young to fight but eager to contribute, embraced toothbrushing as their way of supporting the war effort. By 1944, as Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy and pushed across France toward Germany, American dental hygiene had undergone a quiet revolution. The military had successfully transformed the habits of millions of servicemen. But more importantly, those habits were spreading throughout civilian society. Toothbrush sales were climbing. Toothpaste production, despite wartime rationing of many consumer goods, remained a priority because both military and civilian demand had exploded. The post-war years would see this transformation accelerate. As 12 million American servicemen returned home between 1945 and 1946, they brought their military habits with them. They brushed their teeth every morning and every evening. They expected their wives and children to do the same. They bought toothbrushes and toothpaste as household necessities, not luxuries. They visited dentists for checkups, not just emergencies. They filled cavities before they became infections. This generation of veterans became fathers. They taught their children to brush. Those children grew up assuming that toothbrushing was normal, universal, something everyone did. They didn't know that their grandfathers had gone months or years without brushing. They didn't know that in 1940, their father might have been one of the 93% who didn't brush regularly. All they knew was that every morning and every evening you brushed your teeth. It was what you did. The economic impact was enormous. The toothpaste industry, which had been relatively small before the war, exploded. Colgate, Pepsodent, Ipana, Drive Wests, brands that had existed in the 1930s but had limited market share, became household names. By 1950, toothpaste sales had increased by more than 400% compared to 1940 levels. Toothbrush manufacturers couldn't keep up with demand. Dentists, who had struggled to find patients during the Depression, now found themselves booked months in advance. But the real impact was on public health. Dental decay, which had been endemic in 1940, began a long, slow decline. The data would take years to compile, but by the 1960s, researchers could see the trend lines clearly. Americans were losing fewer teeth. They were experiencing fewer dental infections. Dental-related sick days were declining. Life expectancy, which had been rising due to antibiotics and other medical advances, received an additional boost from improved dental health. Oral infections, which could spread to the heart and brain, became less common. Malnutrition related to inability to chew properly decreased. The success of the military's dental hygiene program became a case study in public health intervention. How do you change the behavior of an entire nation? The military had done it, and the lessons were clear. First, make the desired behavior easy by providing the necessary tools and removing barriers. Second, create a social environment where the behavior is normal and expected. Third, maintain consistency and discipline until the behavior becomes automatic. Fourth, leverage authority figures, drill sergeants, officers, parents, teachers to reinforce the behavior. Fifth, give the behavior meaning beyond itself. Toothbrushing wasn't just about teeth. It was about discipline, about self-respect, about being a good soldier or a good citizen. These lessons would be applied to other public health challenges in the decades that followed. Seatbelt usage, smoking cessation, exercise programs. The basic principles remained the same. Identify the desired behavior, remove barriers, create social support, maintain consistency, give it meaning. But in 1942, as young American soldiers lined up at latrines with toothbrushes in hand, none of them were thinking about public health theory. They were just following orders. They were brushing their teeth because their sergeant said so, because everyone else was doing it, because it was part of the routine. They didn't know they were part of a revolution. They didn't know that this simple act, repeated twice daily by millions of men, would transform American health for generations to come. The dental crisis that the military faced in 1941 had been a symptom of deeper issues: poverty, lack of education, absence of public health infrastructure. The military's response, mandatory toothbrushing, addressed the symptom, but it also began to address those deeper issues. When soldiers returned home, they carried with them not just the habit of brushing, but an understanding that health was something you could control, something you could improve through daily actions. This was a radical idea for many Americans in the 1940s, when illness and decay seemed like inevitable facts of life. The transformation wasn't instant, and it wasn't universal. Rural areas, particularly in impoverished regions, lagged behind. Even in the 1950s, many Americans still lacked access to dentists or couldn't afford regular dental care. But the cultural shift had occurred. Toothbrushing had moved from the margins to the mainstream. It was now something that respectable people did, something that parents taught their children, something that doctors and teachers reinforced. By 1960, surveys showed that more than 50% of Americans brushed their teeth daily. By 1970, that number had climbed to more than 70%. The trend continued through the 20th century. Today, more than 90% of Americans report brushing their teeth at least once daily, with most brushing twice. The transformation is complete. What was once rare is now nearly universal. Yet the story of how this happened, how the U.S. military changed American dental habits during World War II, remains largely forgotten. Ask most Americans today why they brush their teeth, and they'll tell you it's because their parents taught them, because their dentist told them, because it prevents cavities. All true. But the deeper answer, the historical answer, goes back to those drill sergeants in 1942, to those millions of young men standing in military latrines, to that simple order: brush your teeth. The legacy of the military's dental hygiene program extends beyond just brushing habits. It demonstrated that large-scale behavioral change was possible, that public health interventions could work if designed properly and implemented consistently. It showed that authority, when used appropriately, could be a force for positive health outcomes. And it proved that habits formed in young adulthood could last a lifetime and spread through families and communities. Consider the counterfactual. What if the military hadn't implemented these programs? What if soldiers had continued with their pre-war dental habits, brushing rarely or never? The immediate impact would have been catastrophic. Dental sick call would have overwhelmed military medical facilities. Thousands of soldiers would have been incapacitated by tooth pain, unable to perform their duties. Dental infections would have spread, causing serious illnesses that required hospitalization. The military's combat effectiveness would have been significantly reduced. But the long-term impact would have been equally significant. Without the military's intervention, American dental habits might have remained static for decades. The post-war boom in dental health might never have occurred. Americans today might still be losing teeth in their 30s and 40s, still viewing dental care as a luxury rather than a necessity. The public health gains from improved dental hygiene, reduced infections, better nutrition, longer life expectancy, would have been delayed or diminished. So when we think about World War II, we typically think of the big things: D-Day, Midway, the atomic bomb, the Holocaust, the occupation of Japan. We think of grand strategies and pivotal battles, of generals and presidents making decisions that shaped the world. And those things mattered enormously. But history is also made in small moments, in routine actions, in habits that spread quietly through a society. The young man standing at a latrine sink in 1942, brushing his teeth before morning formation, probably never thought he was making history. He was just following orders. But multiply that young man by 12 million. Follow him home after the war. Watch him teach his children to brush. Watch those children teach their children. Trace the spreading habit through families, schools, communities across the entire nation. That's how history is made sometimes. Not in a single dramatic moment, but in millions of small actions, repeated daily until the world has changed. The military didn't set out to revolutionize American dental health. It set out to solve a practical problem. Too many soldiers had bad teeth, which interfered with their ability to fight. The solution, mandatory toothbrushing, was simple, cheap, and effective. But the consequences rippled out far beyond military bases, far beyond the war years, transforming American society in ways that the generals and dentists who implemented the program could never have fully anticipated. Today, when Americans brush their teeth, a habit so routine, so automatic that we barely think about it, we're participating in a legacy that stretches back to World War II, to those military dental programs, to that generation of soldiers who learned a new habit and brought it home with them. The toothbrush in our hand is a link to that history, a reminder that sometimes the most profound changes come not from legislation or grand proclamations, but from simple habits, consistently practiced, passed from one generation to the next. So the next time you brush your teeth, think for a moment about Private Henderson from Kansas, standing at a sink in a military barracks in 1942, holding his first toothbrush. Think about the millions like him, learning a habit that would change their lives and the lives of their children and grandchildren. Think about the drill sergeants who insisted, the dentists who taught, the public health officials who designed the programs. Think about how a nation changed its habits, and how those habits changed the nation. That's the story of how only 7% of Americans brushed their teeth in 1940, and how the Army changed that forever. Not through propaganda or advertising, not through taxation or regulation, but through something simpler and more powerful. The creation of a habit enforced by discipline, sustained by routine, spread through example, until it became so normal that we forgot it was ever otherwise.